So now let's get today's event started. The skills gap is a systems problem. Fix it with AI, data, and human-centered learning with Michelle Pletch. And Gary Lamax sends his regrets. He's unable to join us today, but we also have Marco Horvat, and you're in great hands here with Michelle and Marco. And both welcome to Training Magazine Network.
Thanks for the warm introduction. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Marco, and welcome, Michelle.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
So let's get started, right? So skills gap is a systems problem. Fix it with AI, data, and human-centered learning. So as we get started, let's level set a little bit. There's a good quotation that I use when I talk to folks about digital transformation, of which AI is a part of. And I think this sort of encapsulates the way we think about this at ELB. And so digital transformations, this is from the strategy consulting firm McKinsey and Company. So digital transformation is the rewiring of an organization with the goal of creating value by continuously deploying technology at scale. A clear digital transformation strategy focused on specific domains and enabled by a set of specific capabilities is critical for organizations to not only compete, but survive. Digital transformations are not a one and done project. Most executives will be on this journey for the rest of their careers. So the reason why this sort of resonates with us here is the view that this digital transformation sort of buzzword that keeps flying around is talking about sort of a new age of organizations where we're talking about not just how we do things, but who we do them with and and what we do them with, right? So the old way of working is changing all around us, and the ramifications of that go far and wide. And it's something that we're going to be continuously dealing with as we move along in our careers. So when we talk specifically about AI adoption and how that sort of relates to digital transformation, here's sort of our typical state of AI adoption, right? So we look at AI adoption as having three sort of key factors, foundations to it. The first is an enterprise vision, right? So the first thing that needs to happen is the company has to commit to a significant enterprise resource and leadership support to its multi-year AI transformation, right? With an ambitious roadmap, let's say through 2027, right? So it's the age-old sort of idea that the most important thing is tone at the top. We need to have strategic direction and strategic alignment in terms of what do we want to do, what do we want to accomplish. Now, once we have that in place, the next thing is enterprise execution. So phase two, right? Typical thing we see is an AI task force. But even with that, you still have these execution barriers that persist. You have these siloed initiatives, fragmented workflows, and inconsistent adoption of new tools, right? And then finally, what we're trying to get to is enterprise impact, which is despite budget approval and strong sponsorship from the company lacks a unified executable strategy to turn these investments into measurable, scalable impact. So in other words, what we often see is sort of the best ideas and the best intentions fundamentally fail to impact the organization in ways we anticipate, and oftentimes will have knock-on effects and secondary effects that we didn't anticipate, right? So given that this is sort of the typical thing that we see, what is a better way forward? And what's preventing this better way forward are sort of challenges that we encompass or we face within the current environment, right? So if you look at the data, I'm sure, one of the things that's been hot conversation over here at ELB is the recent report that came out by MIT. If you're not familiar with it, some researchers at MIT released a report earlier this month where they found that 95% of AI initiatives fail. And that's that number you see at the right. Which sounds really, really interesting because if you look at some other data points around AI adoption, there's sort of conflicting stories that can be told, right? So for example, we know from McKinsey that 65% of organizations are using Gen AI regularly, right? So they have a sort of published guideline. They have tools available. They have sort of adopted some kind of AI use case within their organization. So even though 65% of organizations are using Gen AI regularly, 74% are struggling to scale it to value, right? So 3 out of every 4 organizations that are using AI in some sort of use case, some kind of pilot, are struggling to take those ideas, those benefits that they see, and scale them throughout the entire organization to have organization-wide benefits. 91% of employees are using AI for work in some way, according to McKinsey. So this is a global survey done by McKinsey earlier this year. So it's really, really interesting if you take all these things together. The story that sort of emerges is like, look, organizations are sort of adopting AI usage, but they're not adopting it as quickly as the people are, right? So you have 65% of organizations that are using Gen AI, whereas 91% of the people are using it, right? So that gives about 30% of organizations that don't have sort of a clearly outlined Gen AI policy. That you have the employees using it despite this. So despite the fact that a lot of people are using it, and despite the fact that companies are doing their best to try and find value in it, we see that 95% of the initiatives fail. So the big insight we have is this adoption does not equal transformation. Just because you have the tools that are available and people are using it, and even using it for the intended purpose of the tool, that does not mean that you have this fundamental transformation, this fundamental added value, this evolution of your business into what we thought it was going to be. And if we look at this, why is that, right? So part of it is that we believe that there is a cultural gap that exists within organizations as it pertains to technology. So one of the things is that technology is outpacing human readiness, right? So in the previous slide, we talked about how 74% of organizations are struggling to scale. Another statistic around that is that only 22% of organizations move past the proof of concept phase, according to BCG. So a typical strategy when it comes to AI or technology usage is, let's start a bunch of pilots, right? So let's start a bunch of pilots throughout the entire organization. We'll let people be creative. We'll let them, try and figure out the best way to do things. And then we'll go and we'll pick the winners, right? The ones that really seem to work, the ones that people like, the ones that seem to move the needle. But we see that organizations that are using this approach, the majority of the things that they're doing never even make it past the proof of concept phase. So why is that, right? One, lack of shared purpose. This sort of approach of let 1,000 flowers bloom, we'll pick the prettiest ones at the end. Oftentimes, even though you might have strong sponsorship by the leadership of your organization, that lack of shared purpose, that lack of the shared, why are we doing this, right? Because at the end of the day, remember, we all have our day jobs, and I have these deadlines I have to meet, and I have all these pressures I have to meet. And on top of that, there's this new technology that's supposed to help me, but I'm not exactly sure how it makes me do my job better. So why are we doing it? So that lack of shared purpose is a key barrier. The next thing is lack of capability. And when we talk about capability, one of the things that came out of the MIT study is lack of capability from the technology side. So in other words, hey, maybe it's not as great as we thought it was, right? So you do a couple of, Chat GPT, for example. Let's talk about the low hanging fruit, the most familiar one. We do a couple of demos of it, and like, this thing's amazing. You do all these really cool things, and then you kind of get in the weeds of it, and you find out, well, it's not all it's cracked up to be. It hallucinates. It creates these fantasy sort of facts that we have to go in and we have to scrub, and sometimes cleaning up after the solution takes more time than we would have saved if the solution worked like it normally would have, right? So we've overestimated the capability of the tool that we're using. And the other thing too that we see all the time is we see frustration. So that creates frustration from the user side, right? From the people that we're trying to train to use this, because we paint this vision of how the world is going to be better, and we fundamentally underdeliver on the capability of the technology we put in front of them, right? And on the flip side, we see the frustration that also happens from leadership, where they feel like hey, I've gotten behind this technology. I've given you what you wanted. We've invested heavily in the solution, but nobody's using it. And so there's a lack of capability on the human capital side where people are under supported or underinformed on the advantages that the technology can bring, right? And on top of all that, and I think a thing that doesn't get discussed enough when we talk about these things is the lack of sustainability. So even if we do have this shared purpose, right? And we're one of like the lucky 5% that sneak past the MIT study, and we actually have a good solution we've hit upon. We utilize the capability. The next big problem we have is that sustainability. How do we make sure that these wins are sustainable in the future? And how do we ensure that if we're on this digital transformation journey that is iterative, right? And we're building upon foundations and creating like new ways and novel ways of working. How do we make sure that after we put all this energy, all this time, all this investment in these solutions that work, by the way, that they continue to work in the future and become robust and resilient to future ways of working, right? So what do companies get wrong? So we kind of talked about this a little bit. So let's dive in a little bit deeper. So lack of shared purpose. So in 2023, Gartner did an AI enterprise survey for organizations that had already deployed Gen AI. And they reported spending an average of $2.3 million in fiscal year 2023 just on the proof of concept phase, right? So small enterprises reported spending an average of 300,000. Large global enterprises spend more, which makes sense. So just think about that for a minute. This is why the whole idea of, let's just experiment and let people, now there is space for that. I don't want to say like, let's not experiment, let's not be creative or any of that stuff. But there is a real world impact to this, not just from a dollars perspective, but from a time perspective, from an energy perspective, right? If we spend all our time chasing all these pilots without really understanding what is the purpose of all this, which is like, how does this make the business better? How does this make my job better? How does this empower me and make me a better employee? How does this, on an individual, what's in it for me perspective, make me a more capable, market ready participant in the labor force, right? Lack of that shared purpose means that these proof of concepts are all chasing different objectives, and lack of a shared objective and purpose really erodes value and our ability to compare what's working and what's not working. The next thing is the lack of capability, right? So only 5% of respondents to a recent McKinsey survey say that their organizations already have the capabilities that they need to build institutional tools to support transformational initiatives and activities. What does that mean? Is that we have these huge ambitions into how technology can help, but we underinvest in the capabilities necessary to make those things happen. And the end result of that, it's more than just having, a workforce that is not capable of executing on the strategic vision. It goes a lot more deeper than that. Because what happens is, rightfully or wrongfully so, if leadership feels that there is a lack of capability internally, they will find that capability externally. And now you have this sort of situation where you have external forces sort of imposing solutions on people that they have within the organization. And then there's the age-old question where, what do we do when the consultants leave, if they ever leave? And that kind of goes into the next thing, that lack of sustainability. So with transformations, long-term impact is rarer than one may think. With 56% of respondents, this is from a McKinsey survey, say that organizations have achieved most or all of their transformation goals. Only 12% report that they have sustained these goals for more than 3 years, right? So it's that lack of sustainability. So lack of purpose means we don't really know what we're doing, that everyone's sort of chasing their own goals. Lack of capability means, rightfully or wrongfully so, we haven't failed to assess our ability to adapt to these, visions of change. So oftentimes when we see this lack of capability, we'll go to external sources. That lack of ownership within the organization, usually in this, relying heavily on sort of outside folks to do it, along with the lack of a shared purpose, often leads to a lack of sustainability, which means that even in the event that we do hit on a really good idea or a really novel thing that just adds value to the organization, our ability to perpetuate that into the future is severely diminished. So how is ELB uniquely positioned to help, right? So how do we look at this in terms of, this big AI transformation thing is often viewed as, sort of a human capital thing, like it's an HR thing, right? Let's just go get the people that have the skills. If capability is the issue, let's just go get the people that have the skills and not bother with any of this stuff. Or is it a technology selection thing, right? Maybe we need to be more careful on the technology side to make sure that we're not overestimating the capabilities that we have, to make sure that we're selecting for things that have a good purpose, where the use case is clear, et cetera. We fundamentally believe that training and development is an underutilized resource within the organization, right? So, since research shows that most transformations fail due to gaps in skills, behaviors, mindsets, etc., our approach focuses on those dimensions to ensure both the success of individual initiatives and long-term ability to drive continuous transformation. So you think about all the different transformation levers that we have, right? Strategic integration, operating model agility, workflow integration. Those are all like really, really big words. To just get down to the fundamental reason why we do learning and development in the first place, and that is to make sure that the human capital, the employees of the organization, the human beings that drive business have the skills and knowledge necessary to reach these business imperatives, right? So we have the ability through a good learning and development scheme to move actions from support to enabler aligned to goals, right? We can balance governance with responsiveness to change. We can embed learning in daily tasks for better retention, have continuous adaptation, innovation, and ownership, and bolster adaptability, creativity, and resilience. So I see a question. I'm going to go ahead and address this question before too on. So the question is, did the study look at AI champions in such a project launch? The study did not sort of bifurcate between whether or not they were champions or not. It was just writ large over all the organizations that they looked at. So how do we approach digital transformation, AI implementation from a human-centric way, right? We basically have a 4-phase engagement model in terms of how we approach the problem. Phase 1 is make sure that strategy, translation, and alignment audit, right? To ensure that you do have that sort of shared vision at the top, that you have good executive sponsorship, that we know exactly what we're doing, or at least have an idea of what we want to accomplish, and how that is important to the business. And then once we have sort of agreement at the top, and you'd be surprised, or maybe not surprised, how often it is that we don't really have a shared sense of, hey, what is it that we're trying to do here, and why are we trying to accomplish it? Where's the value? But once we have that alignment and that translation, then we look at the foundations, like what is your ability to change in a meaningful way? And we look at it across 3 ways: mindset, skill set, and risk readiness, right? Do we have the same mindset across the organization in terms of, do we have a growth mindset around technology? Do we view technology as an enabler, a multiplier of human capability? Or do we look at it from a scarcity standpoint, where it's people are hard to come by, skills are expensive, I can't get the people I need, so can the robots do the people's job? Those are 2 fundamentally different ways to look at technology. And if we can't agree in terms of what is the purpose and how we're thinking about the problem, it's really hard to find appropriate solutions. So once we have the mindset in place, then we look at skill set. And from skill set, these are things like, how do you like to learn? How curious are you? How comfortable are you using technology, AI generated tools? When's the last time you used them? How open are you to change, right? And what are the skills you have necessary, that getting to that sort of capability within the own organization piece that we're trying to solve for. And then finally, it's risk readiness, right? And so one of the things that's really, really important is that, remember that slide earlier that I showed that said that, 65% of companies are using generative AI in some way, but then you look at another study and it says that 90% of people are using it. So that means that delta between the two, that 25%, there's 25% of organizations where people are using Gen AI with no guidelines whatsoever. And are those people using it in a way that we find acceptable from a risk perspective, right? From an overall business value perspective. So once we sort of laid that foundation, And we sort of are all thinking about the problem the same way. We understand what our capability is and our readiness for change. And we all have sort of the same appetite for risk. So we kind of know like what's in bounds and what's out of bounds. Next thing we do is go to workflow design. And then finally, we use our strategy lab and operating rhythm. So this workflow design is essentially, that's when we do sort of more focused, structured pilots to see what works. And then we use that to build our overall strategy and set this sort of flywheel in place to have this digital journey really be iterative. So we're constantly adapting to the new environment that's around us. So a little bit deeper dive into this mindset, skill set, tool set, mindset. It's a people first alignment of technology enabled vision and strategy, right? The idea that technology is here to enable people. People is what make us different as organizations, and where our largest competitive advantage is going to be. And we look at skill set where we rewire workflows, reskill teams, retool work, and then tool set, start small, scale fast, measure impact. So the call to action, right? Start small, right? Where the stakes are relatively low, right? But just because the stakes are low doesn't mean the impact is necessarily small. But pick one process to transform. Train and tool one team. Share one success story, and then begin your readiness audit. So the whole theory behind this is if we start looking at processes, we often find that something as simple as automating one task can fundamentally change the entire process behind that task. And if you're changing the entire process, usually the knock-on effects of that process affect more than just the people involved. So that's why you got to look at the process more holistically, train an entire team on the impacts of it, and then find that one success story and learn from it, and how do we iterate it and go forward. So with that, I'll toss it over to Michelle, and she can talk more about the connection to human-centered learning.
All right. Thank you, Marco. So, yeah, I'm here to kind of pick up where the AI transformation or the AI adoption, leaves off, because, while we talk about all of these amazing tools and the technology and the data, it's really reshaping the way that we're learning, but we've got to know how to apply it. Because no matter how advanced our technology becomes, no matter how proficient we get in AI and the data that it can collect, we've always got to remember that there's a human on the end of that workflow, right? There's always got to be a person at the end of what we do. So if you think through everything that Marco just presented, as far as how do we get to the point of AI adoption, you get to that point and your people start to use it. A lot of times that's where the conversation leaves off. If you're going to a lot of these conferences and trade shows, probably every 2 out of 3 booths, right, is got AI in some way, shape, or form integrated into their display, into what they're talking about. But if you're integrating all these things, as Marco was saying, without that end goal in mind, without the person at the end in mind, right, you're really just you're not making any personal or business impacts. So we're going to kind of tie this up as far as how do you get from the technology piece to the actual human at the center of this learning. And we'll talk about things like, what do learners actually need to do differently after the experience, right? How does the AI shape that experience? Is the AI making this easier or harder for them? As Marco mentioned, sometimes I've done this myself, go into an AI tool and I'm working and I realize I have prompted it to the point where it would have been easier just to do it in a Google Doc, right? Rather just write it up myself instead of that. So we're going to just dive into that human at the center of all of this and make sure that we're always coming back to that end goal of the human transformation, business goals, achieving those KPIs, wherever it is in your particular sphere. Go. So let's start by just recentering on what does human-centric really mean. Four buzzwords, right, can sit here and kind of tie it all together: purposeful, respectful, adaptive, and accountable. Those 4 things, if you keep them at the heart of what it is that you're doing, you're really going to be able to design with what I like to say empathy and intention. When you're designing in a human-centric way, we're thinking about learners as individuals, and we start seeing those individuals and the real world pressures that they are experiencing. We understand their prior knowledge, their prior experience, and their personal motivations. We are thinking about what challenges they face day to day, what support systems exist, what might make learning easier or harder for them. And then when you do that, you can use all of that AI and the data to help really create these meaningful experience for them that can move the needle. So what we want to remember when we are designing any sort of learning program, curriculum, anything along those lines is to keep that empathy within the learning design. Making sure you are observing what you're creating and creating with the end goal in mind, uncovering barriers like lack of time, unclear expectations, low confidence, right? Making sure that everything that you're doing has that intention and that end goal that you really are trying to reach. So, thinking about human-centered design being bookended by AI and data. If you think of AI and its role helping you to adapt, predict, and personalize, and then the data that the AI and other methods can help you create, giving you those insights, what works, what supports are needed to support them, then you can get to the human-centric learning of empathy, context, and motivation. So when we think about all of it's connected, right? We want to make sure that the AI is supporting the design, that it helps us to really create the experiences, not only that are engaging, but that we can trust, right? We want to know where people struggle. We want to know what each learner needs, how to take it a step further, and the AI can help us collect all of that information. The data gives us that visibility, and then the human-centric design helps you understand why learners engage. And then the AI helps you deliver and adjust and confirms what's effective and what to refine. So human-centric learning, data, and AI all fit together as one cohesive process to make sure that what you are doing is going to drive performance. It's going to listen to the people, and it's going to respond with precision. Coming back all the way to the empathy that fuels it, the data that informs it, and then you can utilize and lean into the AI to continue to scale everything that you're trying to do. But one of the things that I think is very important whenever we talk about AI, not just in this context, but in any context, is, how can you use AI responsibly? AI can absolutely make learning faster. It can make it more adaptive. But for us that are in L&D and positions that have to do with learning and human transformation, we have to make sure that everything we're doing is going to stay responsible and trustworthy. Because when we talk about responsible AI, that's really the heart of it. What can you trust? Marco mentioned hallucinations, right? We've all gone into one of these tools and asked a question and prompted it, and the answers that you get back just don't feel right or are outright wrong. If you've ever used one for identifying a plant or an animal, I can't tell you how many times it's come up with something wildly incorrect. And sometimes, in the case of certain plants or animals or mushrooms, can be really dangerous if they get it wrong. So there are times where AI can be one of our best and brightest tools, but when not used responsibly, it can go beyond just some light incorrect facts here or there into the dangerous territory. So you really have to make sure that any way that you use AI, you're going to be gaining the learner's trust. Make sure that everything they are seeing is accurate, that the data is safe, and that they're not feeling misled or even monitored. So a few things that really important: accuracy checks, transparency, and privacy. I saw someone in the chat say this is not replacing humans, and that is 100% the case. As far as transparency, learners should always know they're interacting with AI. Again, I don't know if you've heard some of these stories in the news of a lot of teens are really leaning into AI as friends or even romantic relationships, and they can get so deep into those AI relationships that they forget that there's not a human on the other side of that chat. They actually get emotionally connected to these things, and I'm sure this is happening with a lot of other situations. So we have to make sure that whenever we are using and having our learners lean into AI, it's very clear that that's what they're interacting with. If the AI assistant gives feedback or suggests next steps, it needs to be clearly labeled that that is where that information is coming from. Something as simple as adding a little blurb that says, this insight is generated from our learning assistant, right? That tiny little design choice can help that person understand that yes, these are AI insights based on certain data, but we're not trying to manipulate them, and we're not trying to make it seem like there's actually a human on the other side of that. So that transparency is really important in the experience of anybody working in the AI space or with an AI. So accuracy and oversight, again, we've talked about it being a really great tool, but it's got to remain accurate. AI can produce really fast feedback and content suggestions, but speed without accuracy can really undermine the credibility of everything it is they're trying to do. So that's why it's really important that anytime you're using AI, you have those human checkpoints, right? Especially, as I mentioned, some safety issues when it comes to safety in the workplace, compliance, performance coaching, anything that's going to be raking recommendations and people are going to be actually acting upon. It's really important that you have that human in the loop, so to speak, to ensure that what is being output by the AI is actually going to be accurate and safe for everyone. AI should be your first draft, not the final voice in anything that you're putting out to your people. And then privacy and consent. As Marco mentioned, there's organizations out there that have AI plans and policies and things along those lines, but there's a lot of people using it when the policies don't exist, right? Privacy and consent are going to be really important. Organizations that you work with, I see it more and more asking, what are your AI policies? What security checkpoints are in place, right? Everyone needs to know how their data is collected and how it's going to be used. So in the case of a learning environment, if we're analyzing completion rates or error patterns, we want to explain how that data is being collected and how it's being used. Though, there might be people that are worried that their answers are going to be somehow tied to performance evaluations. We need to be really clear how anything that we are using AI for is going to be looked at and then responded to, because we want to make sure that we are creating a really fair environment. Clear communication in your data collection. You got to make sure it doesn't feel like they're being spied on as they're trying to learn. We're not micromanaging and all of those things. And we want to make sure that everything that we're doing in this space is fair. Another pitfall of AI can be some sort of biases in the background. If we are asking the AI to generate to check for tone in some sort of role play simulation, sometimes that can skew one way or the other if someone has an accent or a speech impediment or anything along those lines. We have to make sure that we are very clear on what it is that we are actually looking for and what the learner should expect their data to be used for. When learners can see that the system is transparent, that the information is accurate, that the answers they are getting back is respectful, and the way the data is going to be used is going to be respectful to them, they're far more likely to engage more deeply and not just at that very surface level, kind of constantly in the background, worried exactly what's being connected. It's really important that people trust the environments that they're working in. Okay, and so what learners need to know really quick, I have a feeling I know how this will go, can you put your name or just raise your hand in the chat if if you've never taken a training that you felt, I probably don't. I'm sorry, I'm gonna rephrase that. If you've never taken a training where you feel like you already knew the information. Has every training everybody's ever taken, they felt was right on target, met their needs? I see someone typing. No. Okay. Yeah, I think the answers would keep going. Please continue to participate. But one of the biggest wastes of time in learning is teaching people what they already need to know. And that is one of the values that can come with AI and data. Yeah, again, I had a feeling that there wasn't a single person in here who hasn't sat through a training where they felt like it wasn't quite the best use of their time. AI, as we said, can make learning much, much faster, and we could actually overdo the creation of content. We all have jobs to do. We all have things that we need to accomplish in our day to day. But year over year, we hear one of the most common frustrations is learners sitting through content they already know. And it's not just inefficient, it signals that we haven't been listening, right? When you have people pulled from the floor, stopping what they're doing, attending trainings offsite, and they're sitting there and feeling like I'd rather be at my desk because I already learned that. That's one of the biggest frustrations for learners in general. And this is where we can really lean into the AI and where data can become our ally, right? When we can capture even the most basic performance or profile data, roles, previous completions, previous assessment scores, we can really filter what learners see. So instead of forcing everyone through the exact same sequence, we can tailor journeys. We can skip modules when mastery is proven, and then really spend the time and hone in on the skills that they are actually needing to learn. And then deliver refreshers when performance trends are trending downwards, right? This is thinking of it as precision learning. And the tendency sometimes with things like AI, when something is quick and easy to develop, we just put out masses and masses of content. Oh, I can make a course so fast. So we're going to make a course for this and a course for this. But how many of those courses are actually targeted at what the learners need to know? We need to make sure that anything that we are using the AI to, we're using AI to help us create, we're using data to help us, send it to the right people so that we can make sure our courses are these three things: relevant, actionable, and timely, right? Relevant in that we are grounded in the learner's current goals and context, actionable in that they are actually tied to immediate job tasks or upcoming challenges, and timely in that they are surfaced at the right time, right? We don't want someone to be struggling for 6 months until the annual training comes back around. If we are using AI and data in the right way, we can shift this training from these static curriculum systems into things that can grow and adapt with our learners and our employees. And when you have that level of responsiveness, it helps your learners trust and then actually return to the learning. So they're not feeling like these are things they have to do, but ideally things that they would want to do. Sorry. Slide is stuck here. It's okay, I can keep going. Oh, there we go. Sorry, y'all, it skipped ahead after it wouldn't go. All right, so here we are. So all of us and the way that we consume information has changed, right? The way that we used to, if we think back to the days of, if you got the newspaper in the morning and that was how you got your daily news, or maybe you watched the 6, 7 a.m. news before going to work. Now you are inundated with information, right? You're carrying a computer in your pocket where you can access 24/7 information. And so, in the same way that the way that we go about our daily lives have changed, the way learners expect to receive information has also changed, right? Modern learners expect that flexibility, not just in where they learn, but when they learn, how they learn, right? They're wanting to fit this learning and development into, their work day. Sometimes it's, a personal enrichment, and they're fitting it in around family time. And again, they're doing it all while being constantly inundated with information. And so if our learning remains this very static, we're going to sit down once a week and we're going to do this hour and we're going to click through this, right? It very quickly can become a chore and become background noise. So again, that's where AI and data can really become powerful partners, right? It helps us adjust the pacing and the sequence. It can show when learners are either progressing too quickly or too slowly and can make recommendations. It can give us an idea of when we need to intervene when we have an employee that's struggling. And by watching these engagement patterns, things like login frequency and time on task, we're really able to strategically put these learnings out there at a time where they can be most receptive, because a simple reminder at the right time can really increase those completion rates. And the goal isn't to constantly inundate them, but to have responsive support, right? Stepping in when the data shows that they need that extra course, that extra training, that extra coaching, and then giving them some flexibility and choices. That's one thing about adults, right? We like to be able to have flexibility and make our own decisions, as compared to being kind of stuck in a little box of what we have to do. And AI can help surface multiple paths, right? Whether it's podcasts for people that are constantly traveling so they can listen to training, things that are very easy to generate now, simulations for things that need to be hands-on, short at a glance summaries for people that are, really busy and really just don't have time in their day to stop for an hour and go through an elongated course. Learners can fit what fits in the context of their daily lives. And the system that you're setting up can help personalize how that's delivered. It doesn't mean, again, to inundate them with tons and tons and tons of offerings, but it's to use the data to show you when and how to adapt, right? And then use AI to help you make those different adaptations seamless in real life. So that's how we can create experiences that are respectful of people's time, but it's still challenging them and helping them grow. And Lisa, yeah, I see your question. And yes, absolutely. One of the things I was saying before, when you're noticing these gaps, and the AI can help track some things. If you're noticing gaps in the learning, if you notice someone struggling, that's when the AI can really help to slow down, to give some extra support, suggest extra micro learnings or videos, or refer them to a coach or something along those lines. So when you can see there's a gap, right, then you have to just make sure that you are monitoring it in a way that you can provide those supports. So again, this is all about how AI and data can help us, with the human-centric learning. And the way to do that is to understand things from the learner perspective. If we look at these examples, and maybe some of you are in these fields or you're in other fields and how they can apply, but these are just some quick examples of how we can apply these to real life in very different situations. So if you're talking healthcare, right, a patient simulation, there are so many things that go on, let's say with a nurse or a doctor, whether it be the physical actions that they're taking, or the way they communicate, or the way they're showing empathy, and all of these things. AI can really be used to allow them to practice in these safe environments, and can track that performance, can track if they're struggling with patient communication, and can provide that real safe feedback for them, so that they can get that feedback from an AI that is able to read and interpret and actually see how it is that they're interacting, and then allow them to practice and practice, so that way they have that real-time feedback and reinforcement. Sales, lots of role play and simulation things out there that people are going to be able to practice their different pitches, practice their tone, record themselves, and just again have that continuous repetition with a coach that can then they can then more confidently go work work with their customers. And then you've got your manufacturing, right? Anything that has those sort of very large scale safety issues that can come into play, data can really watch during an AR or VR simulation, and they can practice in that safe environment. So that way, once they are in a real life and death situation, they have practiced the skill to a point where they're actually fluent in exactly what that is. And if they're not, they can then rehearse and go back, and you can really gather that data very quickly. So I'm going to speed up a little bit and just go through a few additional considerations when we're thinking of, that human-centric learning and how it all ties together. Some of the things that it can give us is some real-time feedback, right? Immediate insights. We can identify skill gaps. AI-powered analysis can help surface issues quickly before they escalate. Equity and accessibility. Adaptive learning tools can really help with audio for people that need to listen as compared to reading for one reason or another. Translation, adjustable pacing, data-driven insights can really help us overcome barriers that might have not been able to be easily overcome previously. And then flexible technology for different styles of learning, languages, ability levels, so that people that are more senior might go through a more advanced path. If you see that you are struggling, then you would be directed to additional supports. And then continuous refinement, right? This is not a linear process, right? As the AI is implemented and the data is gathered and the learning is happening, the data and the AI is still working, and we can come back to the beginning and just continuously talk and continuously refine. So that way you have these analytics driven feedback loops that can really make a difference in the human outcomes that we're looking for. And then the data, as we said at the very beginning, AI and data are only as good as the humans on the other end, right? Not only the humans that are reading and interpreting the data, but the outcomes, right? It's not just about data for dashboards. Data does nothing if you do nothing with it. So what you're trying to do here is really look at task performance and then adjust as necessary, adjust to what people need. Make sure that everything we are building has at the end that human in mind. Some future-centered learning technologies, things that are already here, things that are becoming more and more common. Augmented reality is one really great way for people to be able to learn processes and spatial considerations in a safe way. Generative AI simulations. I mentioned sales and the nursing and the different people that have to actually do communication as part of their day-to-day jobs. These AI simulations can really help with that, as well as AI coaching, right? It allows you to be put into a virtual environment, and that you are able to practice, get the immediate feedback, and then continue to refine those skills as you get further and further along into that process. And so if you are trying to do something with human-centric learning and you're trying to figure out how to put all of these different things together, because there is a lot, right? There's a lot of technologies coming out. There's a lot of different tools coming out that can make your learning more engaging and faster and all of those things. But this practical checklist is a really good way to just kind of look at it in a really simple manner, right? You want to anchor your task and decisions that matter on the job. Offer multiple ways to engage, short demos, image checklists, quick scenarios, so different contexts can help you reach the same outcome. For AI practice and feedback with adaptive role plays and instant specific tips, human review, right, for tone and accuracy. Make sure that what you're measuring really matters to the work. make sure that all the data we are collecting with a purpose in mind. And then you can act on those different signals and the information that you are collecting and adjust pathways, strengthen targeted practice, searching code, surface coaching prompts, and then always keeping it equitable and accessible, right? Whenever you're building, you want to make sure that you're going to be able to reach, again, the human on the other side of the screen or across the room or sitting across the desk from you. And just make sure that you are constantly going through this cycle of tweaking and checking. And as you gather more and more information, you are continually refining with the person in mind at the end. And so this was just a quick kind of case study. So Maria works in a warehouse. How do I, she's a new employee. How do I make sure that, how can I apply all of these different things to my real life situation, right? So for someone like this that would be working in a warehouse, English is, and for this case, English is her second language. What can we do to support this new employee, right? This is where a lot of different things can come into play. A traditional one size fits all is going to leave a lot of people behind. But in this specific case, we could, institute something like AR, augmented reality, overlay it on top of what it is that she's going to need to know. Use AI to help translate things, get translated scripts, get voiceover things, visual overlays that can really help navigate. We can watch as someone like Maria goes through that onboarding process, and we can see where somebody is struggling and then have a new pathway for just exactly the targeted areas that she needs to practice. Same with, there are things that maybe she's really, really fluent in, things that she's really good at. Those things can be run through very quickly, and then you can focus on more of those areas where she's struggling. So it's a holistic system from understanding where the learner is and where you're trying to go, and then allowing these different tools to actually help you get there. So we can kind of start wrapping up here, because I would love to know, where do you think AI is going to have the biggest impact in learning in the next 3 years? Do you think it will be in personalization, accessibility, engagement, or assessment? And of course, there's no right answer here. So everybody go and put what you feel in. All right. Seems like we've got personalization in the lead right now. Accessibility. Oh, engagement's catching up. All right. It looks like the majority is landing on personalization, and it is one of the best parts that are coming out of a lot of these tools, right? Going back to the start, AI and data on their own aren't what's exciting. It's really the human at the end that can benefit from all of those tools and technologies and understanding the data that they can collect. And so creating personalized learning, whether through in-course or various tools or adaptive learning platforms, whatever that looks like, we're really in a new age and a new way of thinking and learning and interacting with our coworkers and the world around us. And so while it can be overwhelming, if we kind of chunk it and look at individual cases, how can I remember to keep the person at the front of mind? Then I think we'll all be in a really good place as we go forward. Thanks, everybody.
Michelle and Marco, thank you. We have a little bit of time here. We can squeeze in any questions that you might have. Feel free to put them in chat. And if you didn't have a chance to download the ebook handout, don't worry, it will also post with the recording of today's session. Susan, you are welcome. Yeah, great session here today for Trinity Magazine Network, and thanks to ELB Learning for making today's event possible. Ian there has a good question. How do you decide what's the best AI tool for your organization?
I'll start, and then I'll let Marco hop in with probably a more more in-depth answer, but to tie it back to what we were just talking about, remember to not be looking at just the bells and whistles, right? You want to shop with the end goal in mind, right? What are you trying to accomplish? And who are you trying to do it for? So I'll let Marco follow that up.
Yeah. So remember, the way we look at things is like mindset, skill set, tool set, and it's purposely in that order, right? So I would say you pick the best tool that aligns with the mindset in terms of what are the overall goals, what is your overall risk tolerance, um, and then your skill set, what is your capability. So I always look at things as like decisions are made. And Michelle's probably sick and tired of me saying this, but I think there's like three things you have to consider when you're looking at these sort of things. And it's like, number one, you have to decide what do you want to do, right? And of the things you want to do, then the next decision you have to make is like, what can you do? Because you'll find there's a lot of things that you want to do that you can't do, right? And then finally, the last thing you have to consider is of all the things we can do, what are we willing to do? So once you've got that answer, that sort of narrows the universe down into sort of what's actionable and what would give you the best impact. And then it's just whatever's in alignment that's the best fit in terms of mindset and skill set.
Very good. All right. And it looks like, let's see, Michael asked about the handout again for the ebook that was distributed. I just put that back over on the far left underneath the certificate of participation, which you can also print out. The instructions are there, kind of squished right now, but go ahead and scroll through that if you need to print out the certificate of participation. But the handout pod has all three handouts from today's event, and they will, or the two handouts from ELB Learning, and I say the brochures from a training magazine and the upcoming certificate courses, but the handouts will post also with today's recording. Michelle and Marco, thank you so much. And Jen, as always, in the background, what a great session here today, and very, very helpful and informative. And thank you to ELB Learning again for making today's event possible.